My son's teacher has been giving him strange homework. His latest assignment was deadly. When my son Dylan got a new teacher, Mrs. Wagner, I thought something about her was off, but I didn't complain. The homework she gave seemed simple. Research an animal, ask a parent about their job. Easy tasks, always done by bedtime. Then the assignments started getting strange. One evening, Dylan came home looking upset. I asked him what was wrong, but he just shook his head. "No homework tonight," he said quietly, then disappeared into his room. It was odd. He always had homework from Mrs. Wagner. That night, he barely spoke at dinner and went back to his room immediately after. Later, I went to check on him. I opened his door to find him asleep at his desk, his workbook open in front of him. Gently, I lifted it to move him to bed and froze when I saw the task written at the top of the page. Would I miss my parents if I no longer lived with them? I read his response, feeling my chest tighten. I would miss both my mom and dad very much. I love them a lot, and they help me with everything. But I think I could love someone else as much as them if I had to, like Mrs. Wagner said. That final sentence sent chills down my spine. What had Mrs. Wagner been telling him? The next morning, I walked Dylan into school. I approached Mrs. Wagner directly, asking about the strange homework. She smiled warmly, her voice unnervingly calm. Oh, it was just a discussion about how children are cared for, even by others if needed. Nothing to worry about. I wasn't satisfied, but before I could press further, her students filed into the classroom. They moved in 2 perfect lines, greeted her in unison, and sat down in eerie silence, their eyes locked on her. Dylan seemed different too, sitting straighter, his expression blank, his gaze fixed on Mrs. Wagner. Something wasn't right. That afternoon, I picked Dylan up from school. Mrs. Wagner's class emerged in perfect order, walking in time like soldiers. Dylan climbed into the car without a word, staring straight ahead. I asked if he was okay. He just said yes. At home, he went straight to his room. My wife and I agreed to talk to him later, but before we could, Dylan came out holding his workbook. "Can you help me with my homework, Dad?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. I took the notebook from him, but as I read the task written at the top, my blood ran cold. Research the best way to inject your parents with anesthetic. I barely finished reading when I felt a sharp pain in my neck. I looked down to see a needle sticking out. Dylan held the other end, staring at me with blank eyes. The world faded to black. When I woke, my wife was sobbing. "He's gone! Dylan's gone!" she screamed. I saw the faint pinprick on her neck. She'd been injected too. Weak and disoriented, I called the police. They assured me they'd send officers to search for Dylan. I called the school, desperate for answers. The secretary's voice was grim. "No one from Mrs. Wagner's class is here today. Not Dylan, not the other students. And Mrs. Wagner didn't show up either. 3 weeks have passed. Dylan is still missing. So is Mrs. Wagner and the rest of her class. All the parents tell the same story. Their children injected them with something before vanishing. We have no answers, only questions."